Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So Joe, the fisherman, had driven by the lake many times and had seen some other anglers about, so he decided to give his luck a try. On his first day of fishing, he had no luck at all but noticed that another fisherman near him that was scooping in one after another. He had to know the secret. "Excuse me, sir, but would you mind telling me what sort of bait you are using?" he asked. The other man looked around a bit embarrassed. "Well, I am a surgeon, and quite by accident, I found that human tonsil works very well." Joe thanked the man, thought about what sort of bait to try next time, and left. The next day, Joe returned to the lake, tried a different bait, and still had no luck. Just as the day before, there was yet a different man reeling in fish after fish. "Excuse me," asked Joe, "but could you suggest a bait that I could try?" "Well, I can, but I am not sure it will do you any good. I am using a bit of human appendix." Thought Joe. It seemed that the fish in this lake would require a little more effort than normal. He left, willing to give the lake one more try. On the third day, Joe still had no luck. As was usual, there was yet another man near him bringing in fish left and right. Joe wanted to confirm what he already knew. "Excuse me, sir, but are you a doctor?" "No," replied the fisherman. "I am a rabbi." So a couple of young boys were fishing at their favorite secret spot, a quiet pond hidden deep off the beaten track. They were enjoying the peaceful day when, out of nowhere, a game warden jumped out from behind the bushes. Without missing a beat, one of the boys dropped his fishing rod and bolted through the woods, running as fast as he could. The game warden, determined to catch him, took off in hot pursuit. After about half a mile of sprinting through trees and brush, the boy finally stopped, bent over with his hands on his knees, gasping for air. The game warden, equally winded, caught up to him. "All right, boy," the warden wheezed. "Let's see your fishing license." Still panting, the boy calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed the game warden a perfectly valid fishing license. The warden stared at it in disbelief. "Son, you must be as dumb as a box of rocks. If you have a valid license, why'd you run from me?" The boy grinned and replied, "Well, sir, my friend back there, he don't have one." So, during a Sunday school lesson about Noah's Ark, the teacher was asking the kids questions to see how much they remembered. She turned to Johnny and asked, "Johnny, do you think Noah did a lot of fishing while he was on the ark?" Johnny thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't think so," he said. "He only had 2 worms." So my wife walked in on me while I was watching adult movies. In a panic reflex, I instantly changed to a random channel, the fishing channel. As my wife walks out again, she says, "You should stay on the adult movies channel. You already know how to fish." So a recently divorced and wealthy businessman had amassed enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. With his kids already grown and on their own, and all of his debts paid, he retired and decided to spend the rest of his days fishing. He purchased a nice little lake house with a nice porch and some comfortable loungewear. He bought a modest little boat and some top-of-the-line fishing gear. On his first day at his new home, he set out to the lake. He fished for hours and didn't catch anything. He went back again the next day and faced a similar fate. Hours of fishing, but no fish. He did this for weeks, without a single bite. "Damn this good-for-nothing lake. This was a waste," he said, as he angrily went to the local pub. When he got inside, he noticed everyone was a fish. The bartender was a fish. The customers were fish. They all awkwardly stared at him as he came to the bar. He shouted, "What the hell are you all doing in here instead of being in the lake?" "I want to enjoy my retirement and can't catch you if you're all in here." The bartender replied, "Only retired fish go in the lake so they can enjoy their retirement, bud. We're all working-class fish here and too young for retirement. If you want to catch a fish at that lake, there's a trick. You have to say 3 magic words. Give me a good enough tip, and maybe I'll tell you the secret." The man begrudgingly pulled out his wallet and paid the fish $50. "You have to get real low to the water and say very slowly, 'Here, fishy fishy,'" the bartender said. The fisherman ordered a beer, guzzled it, and went back to the lake, unsure if it would work. He got in his boat, leaned out with his face real low to the water and said, "Here, fishy fishy," and cast a line. A large fish skipped the bait entirely and plopped right into the boat. The fisherman gasped. "It worked! I finally caught a fish." The fish, still drunk from last night's shenanigans, looked at the fisherman and slurred. "You're here. I ran out of money last night at the bar. Couldn't get another beer and didn't tip the bartender. He said if I left and hung out here long enough, some magic man would come along saying, 'Here, fishy fishy,' and give me another beer." So for years, 4 friends, John, Mark, Tom, and Dave, have been going on an annual fishing trip together. They look forward to it all year long, and they have countless stories and memories from their adventures in the great outdoors. One year, just a few days before their departure date, John's wife drops a bombshell on him. She tells him he can't go on the trip this year. John is devastated. He loves spending time with his buddies, and he doesn't want to miss out on their annual tradition. Mark, Tom, and Dave are also upset when they hear the news. They try to convince John's wife to change her mind, but she's firm in her decision. They reluctantly head out on their own, feeling disappointed that their friend won't be with them. 2 days later, as they arrive at the campsite, they can hardly believe their eyes. There's John, sitting by the fire with a cold beer in his hand, his tent set up and dinner cooking on the flames. "John, what the heck?" says Mark. "I thought your wife said you couldn't come." John just grins. "Oh, she did," he says. "But I had to come. You guys are my best friends, and I couldn't miss our annual trip." "So how did you convince her to let you come?" asks Tom. John takes a sip of his beer and leans back. "Well, let me tell you, it was quite the night," he says. "I was just sitting in my recliner, minding my own business, when my wife came up behind me and put her hands over my eyes. 'Guess who?' she said. The other guys chuckle. I took her hands off, and there she was, wearing a silk nightie and high heels." John continues. "She took my hand and led me into the bedroom, which was lit with candles and covered in rose petals. I felt like I was in a movie or something." Mark, Tom, and Dave are listening with rapt attention. "She told me to tie her up and handcuff her to the bed," John says, grinning mischievously. "And then she said, 'Honey, you can do whatever you want.' So here I am." So a young guy from Nebraska moves to Florida and goes to a big department store to look for a job. The manager asks, "Do you have any sales experience?" The kid replies, "Yeah, I was a salesman back in Omaha." Impressed, the boss hires him and says, "You start tomorrow. I'll come by after we close and see how you did." The kid's first day is tough, but he makes it through. After the store closes, the boss comes down and asks, "How many customers did you sell to today?" The kid says, "One." The boss is shocked. "Just one? Our salespeople usually handle 20 to 30 customers a day. How much was the sale for?" The kid says, $101,237.65. The boss, amazed, asks, $101,237.65? "What the heck did you sell?" The kid replies, "First, I sold him a small fishhook. Then I sold him a medium fishhook, then a larger one. After that, I sold him a new fishing rod. When he mentioned he was going fishing down the coast, I told him he'd need a boat. So I took him to the boat department and sold him a twin-engine Boston whaler. Then he said he didn't think his Honda Civic could tow it. So I took him to the automotive department and sold him a truck." The boss is stunned. "You sold a guy a boat and a truck. What did he come in here for in the first place?" The kid grins and says, "He came in to buy tampons for his wife." I told him, "Dude, your weekend's ruined. You should go fishing." So every day, this old man goes out fishing from the public dock and comes back with a boatload full of fish. The local wildlife officer was suspicious, so one day when the old man was getting ready to go out fishing, the officer stepped up and asked if he minded if he accompanied the old man fishing for the morning, as he was interested in his astounding catch. They finally arrive at a spot, and the officer watches in shock as the old man opens up his fishing box and pulls out a stick of dynamite, lights it, and throws it in the water. Boom! Fish swell to the surface, dead from the blast. The officer says, "You can't fish like that. It's illegal." The old man pulls out another stick of dynamite, lights it, and tosses it to the officer, who alarmingly catches it. The old man says, "You gonna talk, or are you gonna fish?" So a local priest had just woken up and was pretty taken in at just how beautiful of a Sunday morning it was. He felt it was a great time to go fishing. So he called the church and told them he was sick and wouldn't be able to come in. He then packed up his fishing gear and headed for the lake. Meanwhile, up above, God saw what he had done. Needless to say, he wasn't very happy and didn't think the priest should get away with this. He called over one of the angels to watch his retaliation. Within seconds of casting his line, the priest got a bite. After struggling for a few minutes, he managed to reel it in. It was the biggest fish he ever seen, let alone caught. The angel was rather confused. "Wait, I thought you were going to punish him. How can this possibly be bad?" "Oh, it is," replied God. "Who is he going to tell?" "So I got this uncle who's really rich, but he's also a miser, a real skinflint, if you will. You know Howard Hughes? How he would wear empty boxes on his feet instead of buying shoes. That's my uncle. The only difference is he wouldn't even use boxes. He would just go barefoot. That's how much of a tight bastard he was. May God rest his soul. I tell you, he was a miserable man. His only joy in life is fly fishing. Every year, he would traverse to this same cabin out in the middle of nowhere where the fishing was good. And every year for 20 years, he had the same taxi driver pick him up at the airport and drive him to this same godforsaken cabin. This cabin was at the bottom of this huge ravine, a canyon you might call it, with a long snaky road to drive down to it. Almost 20 years without incident, until one year my uncle made his annual trip. And then on this faithful day, a deer jumps out in front of the taxi and the driver swerves to miss it. Right, and runs right off the road. So they go off barreling ass over elbows down this canyon. the taxi doing flip after flip, nearly killing them until by the good Lord's grace, the pandemonium stops and they find themselves amidst the wreckage near the cabin. My uncle starts to wail the tar out of this poor taxi driver with his umbrella. He always carried an umbrella, you know, even when it wasn't raining. So he's hitting him left and right and up the side and says, "All these years you knew a shortcut and were overcharging me." So there once was an ice fishing contest between Sweden and Norway. The first day the Swedes caught 10 fishes, the Norwegians none. The second day the Swedes caught 13 fishes, and the Norwegians drew a blank once again. At the end of the third day, the Norwegians still hadn't got a single fish to show for their effort, so they decided to send over a spy to the Swedish camp to see what their secret trick was. After a short while, the guy comes sprinting back full of excitement, shouting, "They drilled holes in the ice." So one Saturday morning, a guy gets up early, dresses quietly, gets his lunch made, puts on his long johns, grabs the dog, and goes to the garage to hook his boat and trailer to the truck. Coming out of his garage, rain is pouring down. It is like a torrential downpour. Snow is mixed in with the rain, and the wind is blowing 50 miles per hour. He comes back into the house and turns the TV to the Weather Channel. He finds it's going to be bad weather all day long, so he puts his boat back in the garage, quietly undresses and slips back into bed. There, he cuddles up to his wife's back, now with a different anticipation, and whispers, "The weather out there is terrible." To which she sleepily replies, "I know. Can you believe my stupid husband is out fishing in that stuff?" So it was raining hard and a big puddle had formed in front of an Irish pub. An old man stood beside the puddle holding a stick with a string on the end and jiggled it up and down in the water. A curious gentleman asked what he was doing. "Fishing," replied the old man. Poor old fool, thought the gentleman, so he invited the old man to have a drink in the pub. Feeling he should start some conversation while they were sipping their whiskey, the gentleman asked, "And how many have you caught?" "You're the 8th, he replied. So, in a quaint little fishing village, a fisherman strolled up the wharf, carrying 2 lively lobsters, each weighing at least 3 pounds, one in each hand. This was quite a sight, as it was 3 weeks after the season had closed. As luck would have it, the fisherman ran into the federal fisheries officer at the end of the wharf. The officer, upon seeing the wriggling lobsters, exclaimed, "Well, my lad, I've got you this time with 2 live lobsters 3 weeks after the season closed." The fisherman, ever the quick thinker, replied, "No, my friend, you are mistaken. These are 2 trained lobsters that I caught 2 weeks before the season ended." The fisheries officer, clearly taken aback, asked, "Trained like how?" "Well, my son," the fisherman began, "each day I take these 2 from my house down to the wharf and let them have a swim. While they swim, I sit on the wharf and enjoy a smoke or 2. After about 15 minutes, I whistle, and up come my 2 loyal lobsters, and I take them home." The fisheries officer, still skeptical, said, "Likely story. Let's take them down the wharf and see if it's true." So, the fisherman led the way to the end of the wharf, where, under the watchful eye of the fisheries officer, he gently lowered both lobsters into the water. The fisherman then sat on a piling and lit up a smoke, and then another. After about 15 minutes, the fisheries officer turned to the fisherman and said, "How about whistling now?" The fisherman, with a sly grin, replied, "What for?" The fisheries officer, growing more impatient, said to call in the lobsters. The fisherman, in his most innocent voice, replied, "What lobsters?" So, an Arkansas man won a bass boat in a raffle. He brought it home, and his wife took one look and said, "What you gonna do with that? Ain't no water deep enough to float a boat within 100 miles of here." He replied, "I won it, and I'm gonna keep it." A few days later, his brother came by and asked the wife, "Where's my brother?" She pointed out back and said, "He's out there in his bass boat." The brother walked out to the field and found his brother sitting in the boat with a fishing rod, smack in the middle of the dry field. He hollered, "What are you doing?" His brother shot back, "I'm fishing. What does it look like I'm doing?" The brother yelled, "It's people like you that make folks think we're stupid. If I could swim, I'd come out there and whoop your ass." So 3 blondes are sitting by the side of a river holding fishing poles with the lines in the water. A game warden comes up behind them, taps them on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, ladies, I'd like to see your fishing licenses." "We don't have any," replied the first blonde. "Well, if you're going to fish, you need fishing licenses," said the game warden. "But officer," replied the second blonde, "we aren't fishing. We all have magnets at the end of our lines, and we're collecting debris off the bottom of the river." The game warden lifted up all the lines, and sure enough, there were horseshoe magnets tied on the end of each line. "Well, I know of no law against it," said the game warden. "Take all the debris you want." And with that, he left. As soon as the game warden was out of sight, the 3 blondes started laughing hysterically. "What a dumb fish cop," the second blonde said to the other 2. "Doesn't he know that there are steelhead trout in this river?" So Jim had an awful day fishing on the lake, sitting in the blazing sun all day without catching a single one. On his way home, he stopped at the supermarket and ordered 4 catfish. He told the fish salesman, "Pick 4 large ones out and throw them at me, will you?" The fish salesman raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by Jim's unusual request. He replied, "Why do you want me to throw them at you?" Jim explained his plan, saying, "Because I want to tell my wife that I caught them." The fish salesman replied, "Okay, but I suggest that you take the orange trout." Jim was puzzled. "Why's that?" "Because your wife came in earlier today and said that if you came by, I should tell you to take orange trout. That's what she'd like for supper tonight." So Bob was a very keen angler, but he eventually found time to meet a lovely girl, and they were married. After the honeymoon, Bob was in his garage, sorting out reels when his new wife came in to watch him. After a long period of silence, she finally said, "Darling, I've just been thinking now that we are married. Maybe you don't need to spend so much of your time out here in your garage, and you could think about selling some of your fishing stuff, like, do you need all those rods, lures, old reel parts, and smelly nets? You could sell that tatty boat, and with the money we could have a new bathroom." A horrified look crept over Bob's face and silently stared at her. She said, "Darling, what's wrong?" He replied, "Nothing, but for a minute there, you were starting to sound like my ex-wife." "Ex-wife?" She screamed. "You never told me you were married before." Bob replied, "I wasn't." So after 35 years of marriage, a husband and wife sought the help of a counselor to address their issues. Upon being asked about their problems, the wife launched into a long-winded tirade detailing every single issue they had faced during their years of marriage. She went on and on. describing the neglect, lack of intimacy, emptiness, loneliness, and the feeling of being unloved and unlovable. She even presented a laundry list of unmet needs that she had endured over the years. After patiently listening to her grievances for a reasonable amount of time, the therapist stood up, walked around his desk, and asked the wife to stand. He then proceeded to embrace her passionately and kiss her deeply as her husband watched with a raised eyebrow. The woman fell silent and sat down, dazed by the unexpected turn of events. The therapist turned to the husband and said, "This is the kind of affection your wife needs at least 3 times a week. Can you do this for her?" The husband, without missing a beat, replied, "Well, I can drop her off here on Mondays and Wednesdays, but I go fishing on Fridays." So a man went fishing and hadn't caught a thing in 4 hours, when all of a sudden his neighbor Bob turned up and cast his rod into the stream, and within half an hour his keep net was full. The man is getting quite pissed off at this, so decides to ask Bob how he does it. Bob kindly tells him, "Well, my friend, go home tonight and rub your hand between your wife's legs, and then rub it in with all your worms, and the smell will attract the fish." The man thinks this is a good idea, so he goes home and sees the wife standing by the stove cooking dinner. He goes up to her, sticks his hand up her skirt, and starts rubbing away. The wife giggles and says, "Oh, hello, Bob. Off to fishing again?" So a man named Jack called his wife, Mary, from work and shared some exciting news. "Honey, I've been invited to go on a fishing trip to Canada with my boss and several of his friends. We'll be gone for a week. This is a great opportunity for me to get that promotion I've been wanting. So could you please pack enough clothes for a week and set out my rod and fishing box? We're leaving from the office, and I'll swing by the house to pick up my things. Oh, and please pack my new blue silk pajamas," he added. Mary thought this sounded a bit suspicious, but being the supportive wife she was, she did exactly as Jack requested. The following weekend, Jack returned home, a little tired but otherwise looking good. Mary welcomed him and asked if he had caught many fish. "Yes, I caught plenty of salmon, some bluegill, and even a few swordfish," Jack replied. Then, with a puzzled expression, he inquired, "But why didn't you pack my new blue silk pajamas like I asked you to do?" Mary smiled and said, "I did. They're in your fishing box." So, a couple goes on vacation to a fishing resort. The husband likes to fish at the crack of dawn. The wife likes to read. One morning, the husband returns after several hours of fishing and decides to take a nap. Although not familiar with the lake, the wife decides to take the boat out. She motors out a short distance, anchors, and continues to read her book. Along comes a law enforcement officer in his boat. He pulls up alongside the woman and says, "Good morning, miss. What are you doing?" "Reading a book," she replies, thinking, "Isn't it obvious?" "You're in a restricted fishing area," he informs her. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm not fishing. I'm reading." "Yes, but you have all the equipment. I'll have to take you in and write you up. If you do that, I'll have to charge you with sexual assault," says the woman. "But I haven't even touched you," says the officer. "That's true, but you have all the equipment." The officer says, "Have a nice day." So a woman goes into a fishing store to buy a rod and reel for her grandson's birthday. She doesn't know which one to get, so she just grabs one and goes over to the counter. The clerk, standing behind the counter, is wearing dark shades. She says to him, "Excuse me, sir. Can you tell me anything about this rod and reel?" He says, "Miss, I'm completely blind, but if you'll drop it on the counter, I can tell you everything from the sound it makes." She doesn't believe him, but drops it on the counter anyway. He says, "That's a 6-foot Shakespeare graphite rod with a Zebco 404 reel and 10-pound test line. It's a good all-around combination, and it's on sale this week for only $20. She says, "It's amazing that you can tell all that just by the sound of it dropping on the counter. I'll take it." As she opens her purse, her credit card drops on the floor. "Oh, that sounds like a MasterCard," he says. She bends down to pick it up and accidentally farts. At first, she is really embarrassed, but then realizes there is no way the blind clerk could tell it was her who tooted. Being blind, he wouldn't know that she was the only person around. The man rings up the sale and says, "That'll be $34.50, please." The woman is totally confused by this and asks, "Didn't you tell me the rod and reel were on sale for $20? How did you get $34.50? He replies, "Yes, miss. The rod and reel is $20, but the duck call is $11, and the catfish bait is $3.50. She paid it and left without saying a word. So, Jesus and Moses are out fishing on a lake one day. Jesus looks at Moses and asks, "How are your powers? Still got them or what?" Moses says, "I'm not sure." He places his hands palm to palm and slowly separates them. The lake parts down the middle, and the boat drops to the bottom of the lake. They look around at all the fish flopping on the lake bottom. "Not bad," says Jesus. Moses then brings his hands back together, and the lake returns to normal, and they float back to the top. Moses then asks the same of Jesus and his powers. Jesus says, "I don't know. Let's see." Jesus stands up and steps out of the boat with a loud splash. After some thrashing around, Moses helps Jesus back into the boat and asks, "What happened?" Jesus replied, "I should have known better. The last time I tried that, I didn't have these damn holes in my feet. So I had to go into the city for some business yesterday. After parking the car, I walked to the office building I was going to. Along the way, I passed several street bums. One particularly dirty bloke who really stunk came up to me and asked me for some money so he could get something to eat. Half jokingly, I asked him how did I know that if I gave him money for food, he wouldn't just go fishing instead. He looked at me funny and said, "Fishing? I never go fishing. I spend my days trying to stay alive on the street." Getting serious, I then asked him if he would just spend the money on beer. He answered, "You may not believe this, but I do not drink, not a drop." I told him to come with me. I was going to bring him home and have my girlfriend fix him the best meal he's ever had. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know I'm pretty filthy and I probably don't smell too good." "You'd be doing me a favor," I told him. "I want to show my girlfriend what a bloke who doesn't fish or drink beer looks like." So a man is fishing and catches a nice big bass. The bass looks at the man and says, "Hey, don't eat me. I can grant you 3 wishes if you don't." The man goes, "3 wishes, eh?" Then pulls out a cigarette and a lighter, but drops the lighter. He says to the fish, "For my first wish, I wish you would get the lighter and light my cigarette." The fish is confused, but agrees and bends over to pick up the lighter. Just then a man screws the fish from behind. The fish is deeply confused, but just wants to end this as fast as possible and says, "And for your second wish," the man says, I want you to light my cigarette for real this time." But as soon as the fish bends over, he screws the fish from behind again. The fish then says, "And for your last wish." The man says, "Light my cigarette." The fish must handle all requests and bends over again and gets screwed again. As the fish jumps back in the water, he thinks to himself, "I can't wait to see that guy in hell so I can get my revenge." A few years later, when the fish dies, he roams all around hell looking for the fisherman. As he walks around, he notices people in giant cauldron pots, each hotter than the last. Yet when he finally gets to the fisherman, he notices the man is in a lukewarm pot swimming around with glee. The fish calls over Satan and says, "Hey, how come his pot's not lit?" Satan points down at the ground and says, "There's the lighter. You can try if you want." So a blonde decided she wanted to try something new for the winter. So she went to the bookstore and bought every book she could find on ice fishing. She spent weeks reading and studying, determined to become an expert. Finally, she felt ready and set out for her first ice fishing trip. She meticulously packed all her tools and equipment, making sure each item had its place. When she arrived at the ice, she found a quiet spot, set up her padded stool, and laid out her gear. Just as she was about to cut her first hole in the ice, a booming voice from above said, "There are no fish under the ice." Startled, the blonde quickly gathered her things, moved to a new spot on the ice, poured herself some hot chocolate, and started to cut another hole. Again, the voice thundered, "There are no fish under the ice." Confused but determined, she packed up and moved to the far side of the ice. She carefully set everything up once more, making sure everything was perfect. Just as she was about to cut yet another hole, the voice roared again, "There are no fish under the ice." Terrified, the blonde looked up and asked, "Is that you, Lord?" The voice responded, "No, this is the manager of the skating rink." So two men from the city decided to head to the mountains in the middle of winter to do some ice fishing. They'd heard from friends how good it was, so they decided to take advantage of the cold weather and head to a frozen lake. Just before they got to the lake, they stopped at a little bait shop and got all their tackle. One of them said, "We're gonna need an ice pick." So they got that and took off. In less than 2 hours, one of them was back at the shop and said, "We're gonna need another dozen ice picks." The worker in the shop wanted to ask some questions, but he didn't, so he sold him the picks and the man left. In about an hour, he was back and said, "We're gonna need all the ice picks you've got." The worker couldn't stand it any longer, so he asked, "By the way, how are you fellows doing?" "Not very well at all," he answered. "We haven't even got the boat in the water yet." So two guys are on the lake, ice fishing, freezing their balls off, catching nothing. There's a kid, about 12 years old, down a couple dozen yards, pulling out fish after fish. The dudes shake their head in amazement, and one gets up to go talk to the kid. "Hey kid, how come you're catching all these fish?" The kid mumbles something the guy can't make out. He goes back to a buddy and reports his failure to find the secret. Another 20 minutes go by. The kid pulls up 3 more beauties. The other guy decides to give it a go talking to the kid. Same result. Another hour of catching nothing, and the kid has caught and released some of the nicest fish these guys have ever seen, each bigger than the last. The kid is packing up, having reached his limit of beauties. Knowing this is their last chance, they both go up to the kid. "Come on, kid, level with us. How are you catching all these fish?" The kid looks at them, shakes his head, and spits into his hand a squirming brown mass. I told you guys already. You need to keep your worms warm. So two men were sitting at a bar recounting their dreams. I dreamed I was on vacation, one man said fondly. It was just me and my fishing rod and this big, beautiful lake. What a dream. I had a great dream too, said the other. I dreamed I was in bed with two beautiful women and having the time of my life. His companion looked over and exhorted, You dreamed you had two women and you didn't call me. Oh, I did, said the other. But when I called, you'd gone fishing. So a priest, a nun, little Johnny, and a lawyer are out fishing in the Gulf of Mexico when they suddenly realize they've drifted far from shore. Their small boat begins to take on water and starts sinking. Panicking, they look for life preservers and find there's only one. The nun says, We adults have lived good lives. We should give little Johnny a chance. He has his whole life ahead of him. The lawyer responds, Screw that kid. The priest, glancing at his watch, says, Do you really think we have enough time? So four married blokes go fishing. After an hour, the following conversation took place. The first bloke said, You have no idea what I had to do to be able to come out fishing this weekend. I had to promise my wife that I would paint every room in the house next weekend. The second bloke said, That is nothing. I had to promise my wife that I would build her a new deck for the pool. The third bloke said, Man, you both have it easy. I had to promise my wife that I would remodel the kitchen for her. They continued to fish. When they realized that the fourth bloke has not said a word, they asked him, You haven't said anything about what you had to do to be able to come fishing this weekend. What's the deal? The fourth bloke replied, I just set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. When it went off, I shut off my alarm, gave the wife a slap on her butt, and said, Fishing or making love? And she said, Wear sunblock. So a German, a Frenchman, and an Englishman go fishing. They fish quite happily for a while, until the German catches a huge golden fish, but as he pulls it off the hook, it says, Please don't kill me. Spare my life, and I'll grant you all a wish. The German throws the fish back and says, I wish for a mug of beer that will never empty, and immediately a foaming mug of ice-cold German ale appears in his hand. He takes a long swig, and when he puts it down, it's still miraculously full. The Frenchman and Englishman are, of course, amazed. I wish, said the Frenchman, for a wall to be built around France, 10 miles high and 10 miles thick, so that nobody can get in and nobody can get out. The fish screws up its eyes in concentration for a moment, then says, Done. And what do you want? Is there a wall around France? Asks the Englishman. Yes, replies the fish. Is it 10 miles high and 10 miles thick? Yes. And can nobody get in and nobody get out? Yes. Well, then, says the Englishman, I want you to fill it with water. So I went fishing this morning, but after a short time I ran out of worms. Then I saw a cottonmouth snake with a frog in his mouth. Frogs are good bass bait. Knowing the snake couldn't bite me with the frog in his mouth, I grabbed him right behind the head, took the frog, and put it in my bait bucket. Now the dilemma was how to release the snake without getting bit. So I grabbed my bottle of Jack Daniels and poured a little whiskey in its mouth. His eyes rolled back. He went limp. I released him into the lake without incident and carried on fishing using the frog. A little later, I felt a nudge on my foot. It was that snake with 2 more frogs. So a 4th grade teacher was giving her pupils a lesson in logic. "Here is the situation," she said. A man is standing up in a boat in the middle of a river, fishing. He loses his balance, falls in, and begins splashing and yelling for help. His wife hears the commotion, knows he can't swim, and runs down to the bank. Why do you think she ran to the bank? A girl raised her hand and asked, "To draw out all his savings?" So while sports fishing off the Florida coast in Key West, a tourist capsized his boat. He could swim, but his fear of alligators kept him clinging to the overturned craft. Spotting an old beachcomber walking on the shore, the tourist shouted, "There wouldn't by chance be any alligators in these waters?" He asks in panic. "No," the old man hollered back. "Haven't been any for years." Feeling relieved, the tourist started swimming leisurely toward the shore. About halfway toward shore, he asked the old man, "Say, how'd you get rid of the gators anyway?" "We didn't do anything," the old man said. "The sharks got them." So a man was speeding down an Alabama highway, feeling confident as he cruised along with a group of cars all traveling at the same speed. However, as they passed a speed trap, he got singled out by an infrared speed detector and was pulled over. The officer handed him a citation, got his signature, and was about to walk away when the man protested. "Officer, I know I was speeding, but it doesn't seem fair. There were plenty of other cars going just as fast as me. Why did I get the ticket?" The policeman paused for a moment, then asked, "You ever been fishing?" The man, caught off guard, replied, Yeah." The officer grinned and said, "Did you ever catch them all?" So, some decades ago, the Pope had died and arrived at Heaven's Gate. Sitting there, he spots St. Peter and waves at him. The bemused St. Peter asked who he was. The Pope excitedly exclaimed he was the representative of God on earth. St. Peter seemed confused, as he had seemingly never heard of such a thing before. When the Pope clarified he was the leader of the Catholic Church, St. Peter was intrigued. He decided to take the query to God himself, walking away to talk with him through Heaven's Gate. He asks him the same question. Was there really someone claiming he was God's representative on earth? God replied, "I don't have a representative on earth. Not that I know of." "Wait, I'll ask Jesus." He yells for Jesus, and Jesus replies, "Yes, Father, what's up?" God and St. Peter explain the situation. So, Jesus replies, "Wait, I'll go outside and have a little chat with that fellow." 10 minutes pass, and Jesus re-enters the room laughing out loud. After a few minutes, St. Peter asks Jesus why he's laughing. Jesus explains, "Remember that fishing club I've started 2,000 years ago? It still exists." So, a long time ago, there was a fishing village. In this fishing village, they worshipped the sea. They did everything on the ocean. They lived in huts, on the beach, or over the water. They were always fishing, cultivating, and harvesting from the ocean. They also had this custom where they would name their kids based off of how they interacted with the ocean and how they lived their lives on their 5th birthday. The chief of the village, Wave Runner, had a son. Now, this son was always very shy toward the ocean, and he would actually always turn his back away from the ocean when they went back to the beach. A bit ominous for the tribe who devoted their entire lives to the sea, but on his 5th birthday, he still had the habit of looking away from the ocean. Naturally, they named him Away after this tendency. As Away grew up, He was never very fond of the more masculine activities of fishing and exploring the ocean islands, and he would always prefer to stay home with his mother tending the agriculture. This worked just fine, and they prospered just fine, even if Wave Runner was a bit disappointed that his son didn't want to fish, as that was their main source of food and prosperity. Every year, all of the men aged 12 and above went on a long fishing expedition, where they would catch the bulk of their fish for the following year. Away didn't want to go, as he wasn't the best fisherman, but as soon as he turned 12, Wave Runner insisted that he join to cement his place in the tribe. Away acquiesced finally, and one fall day, the 3 largest fishing boats left with all of the men on it. All of the women and children went out to the pier to wave goodbye, Away's mother crying loudest of all, as she was scared for her boy. Wave Runner and Away were on the largest of the 3 ships, and Wave Runner assured her that they would be safe and return shortly. Well, it was slated to be a 2-week trip, and 2 weeks came and went. Every night, the women and children would go out to the pier to look out to see if they could spot any ship on the horizon, and each night they went home disappointed. Night after night, they did this until 4 weeks had passed. Finally, one morning, Away's mother spots a small ship limping into harbor. It is the largest of the 3 vessels, but it is listing badly, and the mast is broken in 2. They are using a small sheet to slowly come into harbor. When it finally made it to port, Away's mother searched frantically among the men to find her husband and child. Finally, she found Wave Runner and asked him what happened. Well, the fish were not at their normal spot, so we had to go much further than usual, he began. Next, a large gale hit, sank one ship, and the other one we lost. We were about to turn back, empty-handed, but then we started hitting the fish. We were catching so many, and then finally, I got the biggest fish of my life. It was so incredibly massive, it will feed our family for a week. It fought back and forth for 3 days, dragged our boat around in circles, bashed us into rocks, and tore down our mast. But never fear. Finally, I was able to land the beast, and it is in our hold right now. That's great, the mother said. But what about my son? Where is he? Oh, Wave Runner replied gravely. You should have seen the one that got away. So, a chap is fishing and hooks a salmon. He reels it in and is just going to kill it for his dinner when the salmon looks at him and says, "Hey mate, don't kill me. I'm only a baby. I haven't swum the 7 seas yet. Give me a chance, pal." The man looks at the salmon. "Hey, you can talk?" "Course I can. Go on, put me back. There's much bigger fish under the bridge." "All right," says the man. "I'll put you back. What's your name?" "Rusty," says the salmon. "And yours?" "My name's Dave," replies the fisherman. He puts the fish back in the water and resolves to say nothing to anyone for fear that he'll become a laughingstock. 10 years later, he's fishing in the same spot and he hooks a monster. It takes him 2 hours to land it. He looks at it and pictures it on his dinner plate. Just then the salmon opens one eye and looks at him. "Dave, is that you?" "Rusty, I don't believe it. It must be 10 years since I let you go. What have you been doing?" "Well, Dave, I've had a fantastic time. I've swum the 7 seas and all the oceans. In fact, I've just come across the Atlantic, but I was really disturbed." "Why's that, Rusty?" "Well, I was halfway across, and a voice told me to swim deeper. So I did. Deeper and deeper, and I found this huge shipwreck. I counted 4 funnels. It felt like death, so I had to leave. Wow, Rusty, that was the Titanic. It sank, and almost all on board were drowned. Ah, I knew it. In fact, I was so upset I had to sit down and write a poem about it, said Rusty. A poem? Don't talk daft. You're just a fish. How can you write a poem? That's rubbish. No, Dave. Really, it's available in all bookshops now. Okay, says Dave. So what's it called then? Salmon Rusty's Titanic Verses.